Matthew Stuckey here from Verity Baptist Church Manila, providing you with another missionary update. And so this past week we had the big mega marathon, and at the mega marathon we hosted 4 events, and we had 59 soul winners and 200 salvations, which are big results. And for the week we had 245 salvations, and that's a great number. And it would have been higher, but on Sunday we actually shortened the length of soul winning because of the fact most of our church was out all day on Saturday soul winning, so we didn't want people to get too exhausted with it being really hot and sunny and everything like that. But 245 salvations for the week, and we had in the 40s for church attendance again, which is really good, and we had in the 60s for number of soul winners, which was obviously boosted by the mega marathon. And so the mega marathon was great. It was exciting, and in terms of the sermons, I preached on John 10, the door of salvation, on Wednesday night, and on Sunday morning I preached a sermon on the resurrection, the power of the resurrection. And then, I preached a sermon on the Prosperity Gospel Exposed, which concluded the Pentecostal Agenda series. But I did want to talk about a few other things in this missionary update this week. So I went down to Pampanga with my wife, and we hosted the marathon in Angeles City in Pampanga, which is her home province and her city where she lived most of her life. And we were down there, and Pampanga is the biggest idolatrous area in all of the Philippines and probably all of the world. And I've been told before by James White and other people that the crucifixions and beatings are not that common. But when I was there on Thursday, I just kind of left my hotel and just kind of walked out, and I just looked and just saw all these people beating themselves with blood streaming down, and then someone else was crucified to a cross and they were carrying it and they were already nailed to the cross. And I was like, what in the world is going on? Because I thought it was mainly just in San Fernando, and we were in Angeles City. But it's all throughout Pampanga, and it's in other areas of the Philippines like Bulacan, and there's other areas in Manila where they do this, even sparingly, which I wasn't really aware about. But I thought it was a really uncommon thing. I didn't think it was that common. It's actually very common, and you can tell it's very common because not only did everywhere I went did I see people beating themselves and blood streaming down. I saw all these little kids with their shirts off and starting to beat themselves because they thought it was like a fun tradition or game or whatever. But everybody in Angeles City thought it was normal. They look around like it's no big deal. They just cross the street and someone goes in front of them just beating themselves with blood pouring down. I'm horrified. I don't even want to see this because I'm not desensitized to this. And it was just sickening, it was disgusting, and it was terrible to see. And so I'm going to preach a sermon this coming Sunday, and I'm going to talk about the crucifixions and the beatings, and that's going to be the Sunday morning sermon. And I wasn't planning to preach it, but it needs to be preached because this is a sick, blasphemous, and ridiculous celebration that the Catholics have. And so we had the big success at the marathon, and Friday morning, I wake up the next day, 6:15 in the morning, I'm in my hotel room, and I just hear that sound of just where people are just beating themselves with the bamboo sticks or whatever they were beating themselves with. I could hear it from my hotel room. And so tons of people were doing this. It was really common. And so then after the mega marathon, we had our Easter service on Sunday, which was great. And then on Monday, we had an earthquake that took place. And so this is the first real earthquake I've experienced. I mean, I've experienced either 1 or 2 super, super minor ones before. But this one, I was actually on my couch and it started to move and everything. And I'm like, what's going on? Because I've never experienced this before. And it's kind of scary when you're up in a high-rise building. You're up, we're on the 5th floor, which isn't too bad. But the higher you go, the more it's shaking and everything. And you're kind of wondering what's happening. And it kind of lasted, my son's crying and everything like that. And so, I went downstairs and, my wife and I went out and we evacuated the building for a few hours. And we know throughout our church, we have people coming from hours in every direction pretty much. And everybody felt the earthquake. So it was pretty big. And so the main earthquake, what was interesting about it was it struck close to where they do the crucifixions in Pampanga. Very close to that. It was in Pampanga. It was very close to the main area, the biggest area of their crucifixions and beatings. And so, it's possible it was a coincidence, but it's very possible it was not a coincidence because it just happened one day after Easter. And then even, this is Wednesday as I'm making this video, but even in the middle of the night, another earthquake just hit in Pampanga. And this one wasn't big enough really to shake up here, but it was big enough that they felt it in Pampanga, my wife's family. And so my wife said growing up that she would feel maybe 1 earthquake a year and it would be very minor. But, obviously there's a lot of seismic activity going on. What's interesting is that in 1991, the second biggest volcano of the 20th century blew, Mount Pinatubo. This happened in Pampanga. My wife's family had to evacuate their home for like 6 months because their house was half covered in ash. It cooled off the temperature of the earth for about 1 degree for an entire year because there was so much smoke that it blocked off the sun from heating the earth. I mean, it was a crazy, crazy volcano. You can check out a documentary, Mount Pinatubo. It's really interesting to check out. Very fascinating. What was interesting was that year, March 31st, 1991 was Easter. And an Easter is the biggest idolatrous celebration in the world happening in Pampanga with all the beatings that weekend. 2 days later, that volcano awoke and started to have activity. It was 2 months later when it finally blew, but just 2 days after Easter was when it started to wake up and there was activity. It's kind of like it was a warning sign. Look, we had the earthquakes a couple days ago. We had an earthquake in the middle of the night. I'm not saying that something big is going to happen, but you know what? I'm not going to fully rule that out as a possibility. Because I know no other preachers are really going to say it here in the Philippines, but we have to realize it's possible because our country is filled with idolatry that God is going to lay out His judgment. This is just 2 days and right near the location of the main crucifixions, 2 days after, and then all of a sudden the earthquake takes place. Only 16 dead last I heard. I think it was 16. But look, it could be a warning sign. And I'll tell you what, people didn't really wake up in 1991 and the idolatry was just out of control. And maybe in India, idolatry is this bad, but in terms of countries that claim to be Christian, there is no country like the Philippines in terms of idolatry. And let me tell you something, we need to be ready as God's people. And I'll tell you what, people in this country are becoming without excuse because there's churches that are rising up and preaching the truth against this idolatry, and it still takes place. And look, we've got church members in Pampanga. My wife has family. We know lots of soul winners. We know lots of people we love, other people that have visited our church from Pampanga. We have people we love down there. We don't want a big earthquake. We don't want a big volcano. But that doesn't mean that I'm just going to turn a blind eye and say it's an impossibility. I believe it is a possibility, and I'm going to be preaching that on this Sunday morning. So I'm worked up right now. I'm fired up about it. But this idolatry needs to be preached against, this wicked celebration in Pampanga every single year, and other parts of the Philippines as well. Anyways, continue to pray for us, especially if you see this video, because we don't want God's judgment to be poured out, but we know it's a possibility. But pray for our safety. Pray that we can keep going soul winning, and this will not affect our ministry here. Thank you, and God bless.